Now, there are two kinds of social relations. So, man's relation with other men. So, here, man and men is just a metaphor I'm using, and that's why I used pictures of women and girls. So, man's relation with other men. There was this question that there are two kinds when I told you that there are different kinds of selves. So, there's one relation that I have with other men. So, as a person, I have relations right now with all of you who are there in the class, with my college, with the place where I work in journalism as, or any other profession I work. So I'm connected with all of them in through technology, right? But am I really connected? If I spend more time, energy, know all of you more, then yes, we will be connected, right? Then we'll have this idea that we come from this particular socioeconomic realm. This is in a third world country. This is our class consciousness. So my relationship with other men, a worker's relationship with other workers, right? Proletariat's relationship with other proletariat. If that relationship and the acknowledgement of that is there, then that is class consciousness, right? So if these three, so you see a maid here in a village hut, then you see a lady, a small girl child who's collecting garbage, again very two kids over here. So irrespective of they coming from nearby of the same socioeconomic realm, are they connected to each other? If they are, then it is class consciousness. So here Marx says that the earliest, so how will they be connected? How will, you start fighting for that? No, there shouldn't be child labor. No, there shouldn't be any exploitation of children. Maids should be paid this much. The working hours should be this much. It shouldn't be 15, 16 hours a day. During that time, remember, in industrialization, when Marx was writing out, the normal working day was 14 to 15 hours a day, more than that. Now we have what, 8 hours a day? But we know that it is also not, because you bring your work home, so it continues, right? So man's relation with other men is class consciousness. What, in a certain effect, what brings people together is trade union that fights for the rights of the workers, right? So what was the earliest trade union which was formed? It was formed in India in 1851 in Bombay, and then they were also formed in Calcutta in 1854. That was the earliest example of trade union that was formed. So there was this kind of, if there is job or work, a thesis, the antithesis is trade union, right? So there was this immediate contradiction that was created after industrialization, that there was a group of union members who came together fighting for the rights of the workers. But is it really followed is another question. But yes, there is this union. That is the class consciousness which trade union has. The trade unions, what Marx is saying is that trade unions aim at nothing less than to prevent the reduction of wages below the level that is traditionally maintained in the various branches of industry. That is to say, they wish to prevent the price of labor power from falling below its own value. So what is trade union doing? Trade union is making sure that at least, your salary, at least there's some kind of appraisal that is happening every year. At least you're getting the minimum. I'm not even talking, leave about the middle class, but even about the factory workers, that, you can't completely obliterate or jeopardize or eradicate their existence. उनको खत्म नहीं कर सकते हो. You cannot pay them less than this amount. You can't tax them for more than these many hours. ये रूल्स रेगुलेशंस जो हैं वो ट्रेड यूनियन की तरफ से आए हैं. वो किस लिए? क्योंकि if there were no trade unions, then what Marx is saying कि you wouldn't have even given the kind of money which you would have initially during industrial revolution. So here's my favorite bottle. If I paid 100 rupees for it, 100 rupees does not go to the maker of the bottle. Plus, first, there are so many people involved in making the bottle along with the machine. Second, 100 rupees will not go to them, maybe 10 or 20. Right? So that you don't get even less than 10 rupees is what trade unions talk about. The second is this. The second is man's relation with commodity or things. right? So what is commodity? What is a thing? So man's relation. So you see the picture, I shop, therefore I am. Like when Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. So today's idea is, I shop, therefore I am, right? So there is this idea of commodity fetishism. Think about your own life. And especially if you're a student and you have to, after your graduation, leave for some other university or go home. If you look at your room, you will see so many things which you have no idea when you bought. When you will shift, then you'll remember that what kind of pain it is, right? But just look, like I have 600 books in my flat. And when I was shifting to this flat, I asked the movers and packers. I got this huge suitcase and I put all my flat, 50, 700 of them. And I said that, okay, now he can take it to the fourth floor. I'm doing such a good act, now he can take the bag and easily take it to the fourth floor, which has no lift. But the person who was shifting, he said कि इतने बड़े suitcase में कोई किताब नहीं रखता है इतना. It is much more heavier than Mount Everest. So I'm just trying to say that it is, just look at with how many objects we are surrounded with all the time. And we always keep on buying things. Buying things. Now you have Paytm, then you have Zomato, then you have Uber. Now it's much more easier to buy. Amazon, just one click. The prices are so cheap. There's so much of sale going on, right? You just buy things on and on and on. And there's a part of you that starts having some kind of relation with the things that you buy. Start hoarding things. You can't let go of. Like my mother can't let go of my standard 1 textbook which I bought and wrote in. She can't let go of that. Or even dresses of my, when I was 1 or 2 years old. She can't let go of. Once I was staying in an apartment where my owner used to have like a Pepsi bottle from 1998 or a toothpaste from 1996. Can't let go of. It is actually a particular process. And I was expecting that, yes, next time he'll bring a dinosaur also, that he couldn't let go of the dinosaurs. The point is that people can't let go of things. And we keep on buying, piling one after the other. We are consuming. Right. Now there's this entire idea of, different kinds of consumption also. So what Marx is saying, that a commodity is perceived solely in terms of its money equivalence. So for example, I want to buy an iPhone. Why do I want to buy an iPhone? Not because that I know how to use it with all the features that it has, but it is a class symbol. Right. So I'm going to stand in the morning at the midnight to get the new iPhone. But I don't understand, rather than understanding the standing with the socio-economic realm, that for what kind of market was iPhone launched? Is it really necessity for me? Is it having a utility for me? No, but I want to buy it. Or a Mac, right? The labor of the operator of the shoe sewing machine disappears and we only see money value of the shoes. So for example, when you go ahead to buy something, the first thing is, oh my God, this is so beautiful. I want to buy it, whatever it is. If it is a dress, it is a game, it is a book, whatever. So you forget that there's some kind of labor put into it. The person, the worker who has created that thing is not in front of you, right? Anything which you see in your room, you never meet the maker, right? And you don't understand in which condition, socioeconomic reality did that worker work. What were the challenges? What was the exploitation? Right? And you just see that, okay, my shoes, these are of 3,000 rupees. I can buy it. It is of a brand and that is it. So my question is that if everything is about money and the symbol that that object represents, how will you ever know what is the socioeconomic realm of the, not one, because there's specialization, so many laborers who are involved in making that one thing? How do you know about exploitation? Will you ever think about it? No. When you go to buy commodities from Fab India or many other, which are very expensive. Do we ever know from where exactly was it made? Which part of India? Which rural neighborhood? Which city? Which village? Where is it coming from? That particular kurta or that particular shoe? No. So how will you understand that it object has, maybe the owner hasn't paid the laborer much, or there has been exploitation? Say this is a mall, the normal mall before the pandemic. Just look how shiny and how golden it is, with, like, glimmering and sizzling, and so many people. I can see McDonald's over there. The palm trees are also there, artificial ones, and how beautiful, and it is so cold also. So in summer you can go there and have a stroll, and I can see 50% off also. So sale is there, you can buy more, right? Looking forward to it. Even shopping, the idea which I'm trying to say, even window shopping has normalized the context of commodity fetishism. You have a fetish of buying things, buying more and more things. Even if you're window shopping, even then, it is normal, no, to do so. Like I tell my students that if you go to Delhi Hat, don't go without carrying 1,000 or 2,000 rupees in your pocket. So they're like, "No, ma'am, we can't. Matlab, 2,000 rupees is our pocket money. We can't buy in Delhi Hat. It's very expensive." So I say that no, don't go with 2,000 rupees because you have to buy it. Buy something in Delhi Hat, right? You don't go with the idea that I have to go and buy something. Go with the idea that when you enter Delhi Hat, you can say to yourself that, look, I'm not poor. I do have money, right? So that is now what is replacing. What is replacing in 2012? The new concept of commodity narcissism came. What is commodity narcissism, which is a worse degree than commodity fetishism? The idea is that, say, for example, if you smoke, right? When you will go and understand, or if you study the factories where cigarettes are made, you'll see that a lot of child labor is involved. But irrespective of not knowing it or not being aware of it, it is your privilege if you don't know about this, that there is child labor involved. But say that in spite of the fact that there is child labor involved, you want to go ahead and smoke that brand. So narcissism here means that you're going ahead and buying a commodity because of whatsoever urge that you have, irrespective of the fact that it is exploiting someone else, and irrespective of the fact that you have knowledge that it is exploiting someone else. So when you're commodity fetish attitude, you have this fetish and you just want to buy more, consume more, have more, like more t-shirts, more belts, more shoes, more watches. I don't understand having the concept of more than one belt or more than one watch, but the point is that why do you want it? Because that symbolizes something, that you own so much, some kind of monetary class that you belong to, right? And the second is commodity narcissism, is because when you're completely aware of the fact that there is exploitation in creating this product, be it of the animal, be it of human, leather products, whatever, but you still want to go ahead and have more, right? So that is commodity narcissism. Now here are two kinds of classes. So Sakshi, here is your understanding of class. There's a class in itself, and there's a class for itself, just in the sense that we studied a being in itself and a being for itself. We are studying it in the class in itself and class for itself. How does what's the definition of class by Marx? He defines it as a social relationship rather than a position or rank in society. So if I come from a working class, my working class is my identity, which is about the social relationship that I have with the modes of production. What is mode of production we are going to study, but with the modes of production. And it's not more about my hierarchy in the society. in Marx's analysis, the capitalist class could not exist without the proletariat or vice versa. In the same way, just say Hegel had said about the master and slave. A person cannot be a master till the time he doesn't, like if he owns slaves, only then he be a master. You can be a father or a mother only when you have a kid, right? Naturally, normal circumstances. So in the same way, now I'm not trying to give the idea that parents exploit kids, no, I'm just, that was the example that came. I'm just saying in the context of Hegel's master and slave analysis, you have the master because he's able to enslave someone. You have the slave as an identity because you have a master, right? So say, look here, we have the COVID pandemic. Now I'm giving you two contexts. One is one particular doctor, like one particular healthcare worker, who is a class in itself, and there are these other four who are class for itself. What is the difference? Both of them are healthcare workers, right? So this class in itself is the identity of a person. It's again false consciousness, class consciousness. So the identity of this one particular worker, or paramedic or doctor, who is right now fighting in the hospital with corona, giving medical aid to so many people who are, every day there are more than 2,000, 3,000 people dying in Delhi or whatever, and he's all alone. And when you think about him, when you think of the doctor, you think about his name, age, where he comes from, his maybe caste, whatever, and his job or profession in medical care, what kind of doctor he is, and all of that, right? So he is alienated and he's a class in himself. That is his class. He's not linked with others. He's falsely conscious. Now you look at to these four different healthcare workers who are together, and someone is reading at the X-ray, someone is looking at some iPad, or they're together, they're having conversations, and they are working together, and then they realize that there is a certain kind of exploitation which is happening paramedics or the workers during the time of corona in every country in the world, because they are not getting their PPE, they are not getting holidays, leaves, they are not having the same kind of uh, shifts in which they used to work before corona. There's so many patients. They're also having, like initially in different parts of India, if there was a doctor, so that doctor used to, like few doctors stopped wearing the white coats because they were scared that their society owners will start looking at them in a very repulsive way, that okay, now he is going to the hospital, he's going to catch COVID and come and infect us, irrespective of the fact that, be it in UK when you're clapping for the NHS, or in India when you're banging your thalis and everything, and you're showing respect and solidarity. But at the intrinsic level, they have come together, and then they have started realizing that how the paramedics or workers or doctors are also not properly trained. There's a certain kind of exploitation happening in that realm. So then they have become a class for itself. They have come together. They are conscious about each other's problem during COVID. And this is not only specific to India. I'm talking about every particular country where, we have had the pandemic. Look at Brazil, which is suffering the worst now. So this is the difference between class in itself and class for itself. So what exactly is the famous context? The famous context which Marx has said is the history of all hitherto existing societies, the history of class struggle. There's always a class struggle between the bourgeois and the proletariat, and this was in the Communist Manifesto that was published. Remember the Just for League, which was underground, it came, overground, it became political communist league, it became. And then eventually when Marx went to London, so it shifted the headquarters to London, and they wrote this 1848 mein, the Communist Manifesto, which is 23 pages, very thin manifesto. So in that they write this quotation that the history of the entire society is a history of class struggle, right? So now we come to the two different kinds of classes. Though in the books that you read of Das Kapital, there are 8 different kinds of classes that he talks about. I will talk about 4. So the first one is your bush, which is in singular, it is bourgeois. That is how you pronounce it, bourgeois. And the plural is bourgeoisie. So I am showing you the bourgeoisie of India India's top 5 richest people in 2019. And then here you have Mark Zuckerberg and all of them, Bill Gates, which are internationally. So this is the bourgeois slide, right? Each of them is a bourgeois. Collectively, in plural, they'll be called as bourgeoisie. So these where does this term come from? So it is a polysemous word. It's that, its origin is from different um, uh, places, and it defines different things, but the central theme is the same. So the word is basically coming from those who live in a borough. Borough is a structure of living. So just in New York, if you go, structure of boroughs. That is to say that people of the city, including merchants and craftsmen, who were living in cities when you had the entire structure, architecture of cities. So when people, due to industrial revolution, they started leaving their villages or rural parts, they started coming to cities, and according to their socio-economic status, they were able to afford a place they could rent. So, and where were they staying mostly? These owners, they were staying in boroughs. So from there's one theory that the term bourgeois comes from borough, right? The means of production and purchase the labor power of others. Right. So what have they done? So for example, Facebook took away every other social media platform that came. Right. Facebook is right now owning your Instagram also, WhatsApp also, right? So it is taking over any other kind of competition which would have been there. If there's a very famous gym which is coming forward, it wants to deplete all the other gyms which are there, and it wants to become the only gym that you can think of when you think about it. If there is a particular travel service like Uber, it wants to be the best travel service, the most economical travel service that you opt for, instead of you having your taxis, right? Or for example, if you have uh, Amazon is the best. You have grocery stores around you. You can go out in the pandemic, at least wearing a mask and practicing social distancing. You can go ahead and buy things. But what's easier? Amazon pantry. It has become the everyday necessity of you to just click and you'll get it delivered. Right. So they have created what? They have created this one end in itself kind of a paradigm in themselves. You can't think about any other alternative. If there's any other alternative like Ola is there, then Ola will not make so much of profit if Uber enters the market. Right. If Amazon enters the market, the traditional grocery stores are going to suffer. Right. So what is happening? They have started controlling the means of production of what are the means of production basically? It is basically the raw materials, the facility, the factory, machinery, the tools, everything that is used in production. Those are the means of production. And the bourgeois controls all of it. Everything. After the class, think about everything that is there in your room. Who controls which is that company, which is the brand in that kind of production and controls, and then you don't see the alternative. So if, for example, now you don't have people really writing letters, you have emails. So the number of people working in post office would get affected. During my time, I don't know if you guys was there during your time, but during my time we had STD ISD booths where there was landlines and I could go there. I didn't have a phone, obviously. There was no mobile phone was not for everyone, but I could go for an ISD or STD call to these mobile booths and pay and then call from the landline. Where have you seen that booth recently? It's not there. Apart from if you watch Doctor Who, PC. So, but the point which I'm trying to talk about is that so many jobs are slowly and slowly getting redundant. Like during now, if you want to buy a blanket, you go to a mall or you order it from Amazon, wherever you can easily get a this blanket. During my time, we had a person who used to have this instrument एक बड़ा सा तार he used to, and he used to come and do tung tung. That was a sound which would, tell all of us that okay, he has come, and he would make the cotton in front of us, and he'll make the blanket. That job has completely gone away, right? So this culture of how industrialization and after that capitalism, how flexible it is metamorphosizing into different realms, and there's so many different jobs which are getting vanishing. So this is what is also what they're doing. They are taking away the means of livelihood. Why is it important? So, for example, when I wanted to apply for scholarship in UK, so I had to take something called as IELTS. IELTS is an English language test which is divided into reading, writing, comprehension, listening, and all of that. And one of the portions of IELTS is also a face-to-face interview. So in the face-to-face interview, when I was called for that, I hope this is the same structure now, but during my time, so when I went there, so the lady asked me this question. It was an interview, and the question that she asked me was about that, what do you think is the impact of malls on traditional market? So first question was, how do you, link modernization and the mall culture that has come up in Delhi? So I was like, very good, very good. And then she asked, well, don't you think that the traditional market has been jeopardized, being eradicated? And then I was like, acha, yes, right. So what I'm trying to say is that the means of production which are there now, the ways in which we work has changed over the period of time. So initially that those kinds of jobs are being lost. Who is controlling, who is deciding what job remains and what doesn't? The bourgeois. Now we come to the proletariat. So look at this. This is a factory image. You have so many people working in this factory. Those are proletariat. Proletariat is someone who works for a wage, is a laborer. So I am also a proletariat, right? I don't, I'm alienated by my own labor. And to a certain extent, in any form, if you're working as a proletariat, you're alienated by your own labor. And at the same time, you don't control. I need a college where I can teach. I need Zoom. I need laptop. I need this awareness. There is a certain protocol that has to be followed. If I'm a journalist, then I need a newspaper to publish. I can start with citizen journalism, but they won't have any kind of legitimacy. Right. So, am I controlling the means of production which are there around me? No. So, what am I? I'm a proletariat. You guys, when you join the industry, what are you? A proletariat. Even when you become a startup owner, it might happen that you're a proletariat if you're still dependent on angel investors. Anyway, so what is a proletariat? A class of wage earners in an economic society whose only possession of significant material value is their labor power. So understand, I am alienated by my labor. My labor is outside of myself, but the power to do labor is my own, right? That power to do labor is something which I control. Apart from that, nothing else I control. So I'm a proletariat. Where does this originate from? So during the Roman Empire, this was a social class. Proletariat or something was a social class during the Roman Empire. And it was basically when census was conducted for the first time in the Roman Empire, so the people who didn't have property, who were migrants, who didn't have any kind of, uh, these heads that had to be counted, you know, who didn't have the voting rights or any kind of identity in terms of socio-economic realm. Those numbers, those heads who were wage laborers, those are from, that's where the idea of proletariat comes from. So what does Marx says? Marx says that the lower strata of the middle class, right? The lower strata of the middle class, the small trade people, shopkeepers, retired tradesmen, generally the handicraftsmen and peasants. So around you, how will you contextualize it? You will think of the grocery shop owners. You'll think of farmers. So what is he talking about them? He says that all these sink gradually into the proletariat. As a grocery shop owner, you have your own shop, right? As a farmer, you'll have your land, right? You have some control over the land, you have some control over your shop. But what Marx is saying, that in capitalism, all these sink gradually into the proletariat, partly because their diminutive capital does not suffice for the scale on which modern industry is carried on. So the structure of modern industry, the system which is there, the system is in such a way that, irrespective of the fact that initially you started off with having land, you started off with having your own, property or whatever, you were a shopkeeper, you will be made dependent into so many other things that eventually you will not be better than a wage laborer. So a businessman will not be having more profit as he imagined. He would be same kind of money as a wage laborer of 9 to 5 job, or even less than that, right? So because there's so much of competition, there are large capitalists who have come, and also because of the fact that the specialized skill is often rendered worthless by new methods of production. So imagine someone who was a STD PCO owner, that was his specialization. What will that specialization eventually give him? Nothing. So what you have to survive. So Charles Darwin was someone who Marx read, and there's this Darwinian impact you can see here, the survival of the fittest. And you have to reinvent yourself in the changing system, in the changing structure all the time. Thus, the proletariat is recruited from all classes of the population. So what he's saying, that don't tell me that farmer is not a proletariat, or a shopkeeper is not a proletariat. He is. They are. Now there's this another third which he talks about. So there are two extremes. One is the bourgeois, and then you have the petite bourgeoisie. So after the bourgeois, there's a petite bourgeoisie, then you have proletariat, and then you have a lumpen proletariat. So we have done bourgeois, we have done proletariat. In between bourgeois and proletariat, you have the petite bourgeoisie, which is a social class comprising of semi-autonomous peasantry and small-scale merchants. So your shop owners and your farmers and all of them, whose political, economic, ideological stance in times of socio-economic stability is determined by reflecting that of a high bourgeoisie, with which the petite bourgeoisie seeks to identify itself with, and whose bourgeois morality strives to imitate. So much of bush. What he's trying to say, that when a person starts his shop, or when a person starts his own, becomes a farmer, or starts agriculture in his own ancestral land, so he has these big dreams, startup owner, or starting a new thing, making an identity of yourself, not being dependent on a boss. You are your own boss, you control everything, right? But eventually what happens, that you will be sunk into being a proletariat. So that, what were you before you became a proletariat? The middle class. What was it before it became a proletariat? It was a petite bourgeoisie, which was trying to act like the bourgeois, trying to emulate, trying to imitate them. But eventually what happened? Because of the structure or the systemic failure of this entire capitalist system in which we are living, and there's so much of competition, there's new technology over here now, what have they become? They have also become proletariat. Now here is the concept of the lumpen proletariat. So look here, you have people who are completely downtrodden, penniless, fraught with so much of calamity, pennilessness, whatever. This class of homelessness, beggars, climate catastrophe torn people, villagers in many parts of third world countries. Here you see the African context, here you see the Indian context. It is the underclass devoid of class consciousness. So they are so low. They are so low in this entire class hierarchy. It is the last. So first is the bourgeois, then you have the petite bourgeois, then you have the proletariat, and then you have the lumpen proletariat. So in lumpen proletariat is so exploited, and वो इतना नीचे है, it is so low that it is devoid of any kind of class consciousness. It doesn't even have the power to think about class consciousness or class. इतना poor है. And it is the unthinking lower strata of society which is exploited by reactionary and counter-revolutionary forces, particularly in the context of the 1848 revolution. So lumpen proletariat is basically a term which was used by Frantz Fanon, the Black Indian philosopher who was a very famous psychiatrist who died at 36 years of age. And he was also an important part of the Algerian independence movement. So Frantz Fanon, basically, when he's talking about race and racial discrimination, he says that in race, in the black race is worse than a proletariat in the way the systemic revolutions, systemic discrimination takes place. They are lumpen proletariat. So what happened in 1848 when you had the revolutions in Europe? And Marx had written, Engels had written Communist Manifesto, and they were very happy that now there'll be a revolution, we'll watch it. So the revolution was not able to sustain itself. And he also, now when thinking back, he was one of the, when he's thinking back and trying to figure out that why did it fail, apart from the fact that you had the army from Prussia, from British Empire, and all these empires coming in, the revolutionaries, but the idea before that, why did it fail, is also because that there was a lack of class consciousness. And it is not something which is intentional. You can't expect these people to have any kind of class consciousness, not in a derogatory way, not in a way that, oh, they're not capable of having it. Look at the socioeconomic condition where they come from. How can they? They can't. It is not their own internal failure to not have this kind of class consciousness, but the socioeconomic realm in which they are living. And they will continue generation after generation. Right. So these are the different kinds of classes that he talks about. And he says that what is history? History is a class struggle between the bourgeois and the proletariat and the other classes that are coming in between them. So now